Welcome back, everyone, to the episode of the Hey Brother podcast. I'm joined by guest Carl Brown. Carl and his wife have been married for 32 years. He wrote a book called The Seven Sorrows of Mary, and then his life got crazy. And he likes to run, but he loves Italian food, but much better. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I'm Nick Clune, and you're listening to the Hey Brother podcast. Join me and my brother Mitch as we challenge each other and other Catholic men to grow deeper in brotherhood, strengthen our faith, and find greater freedom. Hit the subscribe button and join us on this journey. All right, Carl, it's good to have you here. How's your day been?
Uh, Things are going well. We have six kids and two weddings this year,
Oh wow,
so that's a little crazy, and we're just rolling with it.
is there time between them, or are they like right back to back?
4 months in between them. So the first one is in 4 weeks, and then another one in 4 months, and yeah, so
Nice.
that'll be the first and second wedding that my wife and I have had with our kids. So
That's awesome.
it's kind of exciting.
That's awesome. Well, it's good to have you here on the podcast. We met briefly at the E6 Men's Conference over in, well, what is that? Indiana. I don't even know what the small town was
Yeah,
there.
St. Leon.
St. Leon, yeah. St. Leon. The school was massive. That's all I remember was that school they hosted it in. It was great to meet you there. We tabled next to each other as we're talking to men who are attending this conference. And you were telling me about your story and telling me about what inspired you to write the book on Our Lady and the Seven Sorrows. Um, yeah, I wanted to bring you on the podcast to just share that story with the men who are listening to this podcast so they can get a little taste of what I experienced at the conference.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored that you asked me to join you, and I just hope that, yeah, something that I say here will help some man or some group of men who may be out for a run right now. Maybe they're on a treadmill, maybe they're biking, maybe they're on their way to work. And I want to I want to share the start of what I think was the story, and that is just when I first thought to myself I could write a book about the seven sorrows. And I I told that to a priest, and I said, "Hey, Father, I want to write a book about the seven sorrows of Mary, and I can explain more about why I did that and what prompted me and everything."
Sure.
But he said, he didn't even miss a beat. He said, "Are you prepared to suffer?" And I
Are you?
thought to myself, it was one of those like slow down in time things, like I forget the character, Quicksilver, I guess, in the X-Men movies, where everything slows down and he's able to do all this stuff. It's like he said, "But are you ready to suffer?" And it's like 1,000 thoughts went through my head in a single instant, and thoughts of yes and no and heck yes and heck no, and but within just it probably didn't even seem like any time passed
Yeah.
to the priest had said this to me, and I just said yes, I am. And I didn't I didn't even really think about that until afterwards and looking back, because then things were going pretty good. Things
Yep.
were, I mean, it was at the I was at the top of my professional career, and we had a nice house. We had kids are now starting to go to college. We put an addition on our house, paid for it in cash.
Well,
You know, went for a 10-day trip to Rome with my wife. Things were just going well, and then they started not going so well. And
how long ago
my
was
son,
this that you like you had this conversation with the priest? I don't think I asked that at the conference, but how long ago was this?
that was, I mean, that was early on in me thinking about writing a book about the Seven Sorrows. Probably, probably 8 years ago,
8 years
something like
ago.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so then, yeah. So 7 years ago, then, when things were going really well, I was sitting in early morning adoration at a church in like the center of Cincinnati, for those people who are Bengals fans will know St. Gertrude,
Mm,
and it's early in the morning, and it seemed like every day at that time in my life, I would get up and I would think, should I go work out? Should I go into work early? Should I go and pray a holy hour? And there I was, praying in adoration. And this thought occurred to me that God wants us to move to Southeast Indiana. And it was in Southeast Indiana where that priest said to me, are you willing to suffer? And so it's ironic because then you and I met in Southeast Indiana
right.
just a couple of weeks ago. But so there I was in adoration, and the thought that went through my mind was, God wants me to move to Southeast Indiana. And it's such a bizarre thought. I can't tell your listeners enough how bizarre it was that thought entered my mind, because I don't normally have thoughts like that.
Okay.
But um, I had a journal out and I was writing, and I'm telling God, this is a crazy disruptive thought. It's just disrupting my prayer. What can I do about it? And I started writing, well, if I were to drive to St. Nicholas Church in Sunman, Indiana, and if these two people were in adoration, then I would know that you want us to go live in Southeast Indiana. And I knew these two people, Tom and Barb, but I had never been to that parish.
Okay.
I didn't know if it had an adoration chapel. I knew where the parish was, but it was just such a bizarre thing for me to write out.
Yeah.
And after I wrote it out, I thought, well, I guess the only thing to do now is to drive to Sunman, St. Nicholas Church in Sunman, Indiana. So I got in my car, and it was about an hour drive. And the whole time I'm just thinking that I must be insane. So I get to Sunman, I get to St. Nicholas Church, and there's nobody around.
You said it was an hour. Sorry, don't interrupt. You said it was an hour drive,
Yeah,
and you just went.
yeah, it was an hour drive, just about an hour drive. And I'm thinking, like, that day I could have gone to one client site, or I could have gone to another client site. Like, it was a pretty flexible day. It
Okay.
was it was the Thursday between Christmas and New Year's. So it was really, you know,
Okay.
there was nothing really, really pressing. So I'm in the parking lot at St. Nicholas Church, and there's no cars anywhere to be found. And I pull up the website on my phone, and it says there's supposed to be 7 a.m. mass, and it's like 7 a.m., but there's no one there. And then I later realized that because it was Thursday between Christmas and New Year's, the priest was on vacation.
Okay.
So I almost left, and then but there was this little voice in my head, like, I didn't hear anything at all, but it's just like, well, you came this far, you might as well just walk up to the church. So I walk up there, and now that I'm right at the entrance, I can see that there's a car on the other side of this one building. And then I can see a sign that says Adoration Chapel with an arrow. So I open the door to the Adoration Chapel, and there's Tom and Barb. And, I just didn't know what to do. And then I have a conversation with my wife and my kids, and they're thinking, this is crazy, and we're not moving.
Yeah.
And because, most of my kids at that time are, um, junior high to college
Okay.
age, and none of them really want to move. Well, okay, again, looking back, it seems like that was related, because then when we had a worldwide pandemic,
Mm,
my sales and marketing consulting business just came to a complete standstill,
yeah.
and I had no client work, I had no projects, I had no job, I had no prospects, I had no pipeline. And I'll tell you, it was not a fun place to be,
Yeah.
but I was so confident that something would happen. I was so confident that I'd be able to find work because I've always been able to find work, you know.
Hmm.
I was so confident that I told my wife, let's tithe now based on what income we need for next month. So
Yeah.
we gave $2,000 away to a religious order, and I started looking for work or clients or something. And 1 month later, nothing happened. So I said, let's do it again. And we gave $2,000 away. And 1 month later, nothing had changed,
Wow.
except that when I looked back on it, there was this bizarre sequence of I got a tax return, I got a refund on something, I had an overage on something cash out, and it totaled up to be $40,000.
Oh wow.
Money that came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And that didn't mean I kept giving $2,000 away every month. Um,
Yeah, so
but
your wife probably would have something to say about that if the like, hey, let's keep giving $2,000 away without a plan forward. I'm sure there was
right.
some nerves there.
Well, and maybe I should have kept giving $2,000 away,
Mhm.
but then it just started this long, what ended up being 24 months of no income,
Wow.
and it was just brutal. I mean, because we had two kids out of college, and we were going to have 10 years of two kids in college every year for 10 years straight, and was slowly just savings went down to nothing, retirement went down to just about nothing, um, and just nothing was happening. And about a year into that, as I'm looking for work and everything, and I'm embarrassed and I'm depressed and I don't want to really talk to anybody about it. Um, I had this feeling that God wanted me to finish that book on the seven sorrows, and so I wrote that book, and I self-published on Amazon. And so I had at that point, that was 4 years ago, I had to upload the files to Amazon, and then I had to approve a printed copy.
Okay.
So I knew when to expect the delivery, and I didn't have anywhere else to be. So,
Sure.
I out of the corner of my eye, I see the delivery truck, and my heart skipped a beat. And I dashed out the door to meet the delivery guy in the driveway. And I said, my book is here. Well, he didn't seem so impressed. And I said, no, 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 no. I wrote a book.
Mm.
Because, I mean, to this guy, how many times are people buying books, from
Right. From
Amazon?
Amazon. Yeah.
So he says, well, what's it about? And I thought to myself, I wasn't really prepared to give anybody the spiel.
Hmm.
I didn't even have a spiel, you know? But I took a good look at him and I said, this is a book about suffering and seven Christian responses to suffering.
Mm.
And I'm getting old enough that my hearing isn't what it used to be. So I couldn't hear my kids in the house. Dad, let him go. Leave him alone. He hasn't even closed the door to his truck.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a question of when is Carl going to stop talking about this book. It was a question of when's he going to stop asking me about it.
Yeah.
So finally, I just said, can I give you this copy? Because all I needed to know was that the page numbers were right and the margins were good. And he said, are you sure? And I said, yes. And I asked him his name and I wished him well. And I never thought I'd see him again. And then about 7 weeks later, there's a knock at the door, and I open it up, and there he is. And he says, remember me? And I said, Larry from Amazon. And he walked right into my house. and he's holding the book I gave him.
Yeah.
And he says, "Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for giving me this copy." He made a fist with his hand and he touched his heart and he said, "Everybody suffers, don't they?" And man, chills were going down my spine. He literally said, and I sometimes don't include this part of the story because I just think people won't believe it. He said, "Everybody needs to read this book." and um, and I thought I must have misread him.
Yeah.
So I said, "What parish do you go to?" And I'm like ramping up the Catholic language,
Sure.
like what parish do you go to? And he said, "Oh, I haven't been going to church, but now I know I need to."
Wow.
And the reason I came back here was because a friend of mine was diagnosed with cancer, and I wanted to see if I could buy a copy to give him.
Wow.
And that's when I realized Mary had gotten a non Catholic to spread devotion to her seven sorrows.
Wow.
And so then I get a call, a couple days later, I get a call from my mom, and she says, "Hey, I gave a copy of your book to a Catholic bookstore owner. And she just called me back and wants to buy some copies." And I thought to myself, I can't do books on consignment, you know? I'm not going to try to have a relationship with hundreds of Catholic bookstores around the country. So I said to my mom, "What are her terms? I don't have a wholesale strategy." And my mom said, "What are you talking about? I don't even know what you mean." And I said, "Call her back and ask her what terms she wants." Because I'm thinking she's gonna say she wants 20% or
Sure.
30%, whatever. So I get off the phone. My mom calls back and says she's willing to pay full price. So at that point, I think, well, I'll drive 20 books to her to her shop because it
Sure.
wasn't that far away. But the whole time I'm driving there, I'm thinking, what is she going to do? Nobody. I don't have name popularity. People don't know me. Whatever. So I get there and I walk in and I'm holding this box of books, and right away she figures out who I am because I'm holding these books, and she starts into, "Oh man, your book was so down to earth, so easy to read." And I'm thinking, "What are you talking about?" And then I hear the bell of the door behind me. Another customer walked in, and the bookstore owner reaches into the box, pulls out a copy of the book, and hands it to this customer and says, "Here, you've got to read this book." She's giving the book away.
Yeah.
She paid full price and she's giving the book away.
That's wild.
And Nick, she has given away over 500 copies of that book.
Man.
And I'm thinking, she doesn't know how a bookstore model works,
Yeah. What was going through your mind when you like saw her like reach in and like just give it to the person? It was just like, hey, you take it. Like, were you like, were you? Is that what you were thinking? Like this? What is this
Oh, I
lady?
was
She
completely
crazy?
floored.
Yeah.
Completely floored. Yeah, completely floored. And so our pastor, who was very supportive
Yeah.
of writing the book, our pastor, I saw him and he asked for a copy. He knew I was writing it because I basically wrote it in adoration at our parish. So he asked for a copy, and then I saw him one day, and he said, "Hey, why don't you have your book for sale after Mass on Sunday?" So Nick, here are the thoughts that go through my mind. Number one, are you crazy?
Yeah.
you know, I don't have a lot of books because I don't have any money. This this bookstore owner, that was the first income I'd had. At that point, it had been 14 months, no income,
Well.
except for selling 20 books here. And Larry bought one copy. So my pastor says, "Why don't you have the book for sale after Mass?" And I think, "You're crazy. All I have is 35 copies. But then why am I bother? Who's gonna like? I'm not gonna be able to sell 35 copies because I didn't have a lot of money to build an inventory. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And I'm thinking, who's gonna buy it? And it's just all these thoughts, all these negative thoughts are going through my mind. But here's what I said. I said, yes, Father. So I show up for the first Sunday morning mass. I've got 35 books and a borrowed table, and I sold all 35 books before mass started.
Wow.
I didn't
Wow.
even have enough copies to stay for the next mass. And that's when my wife was like, okay, something's going on here, you know? And then we had friends of my wife, well, friends of our family, but real close friend of my wife, said, hey, you and Carl ought to go to this conference in Milwaukee. It's called Healing the Whole Person. And my thought was, that's great, except I don't have any money. Um, I don't want to go to a Healing the Whole Person conference, you know. And yeah, I mean, what other reasons do I need? And my wife prayed, dear God, if you want us to go to this 3 day conference that's
Mm-hmm.
3 states away, then we're going to need money to pay for the event. We're going to need to pay for gas. We need food and lodging. And Nick, I'm not kidding. That day before noon, someone gave my wife a check for that exact dollar amount without knowing that she had
Wow.
prayed that. So that's the third time we've now had some income, and we're just completely floored, you know.
Yeah.
So we go to this conference, and it was a good conference, and it was. Um, I didn't expect that it would be good. I had just a lot of things on my mind, and the last day of that conference, there's this. They're giving this presentation, and they have these slides up. And I elbow my wife and I said, do you see what I see right now? And she said, yeah, chapter 7 from your book.
Wow. Like actually chapter 7 like from
It was it was the content of chapter 7, but it was not connected to the seven sorrows.
okay.
But it was like it is essentially so they were showing how to experience healing. And in chapter 7, I talk about how Mary, Our Lady of Sorrows, can bring healing,
Mm.
and specifically through her seven sorrows. So, I mean, we were both like just completely awestruck. So
Mm.
we go back home. We met with our pastor. We told him about this, and we agreed that it would be good to break open the content of the book and share the devotion in parish events. So, I still don't have a job.
Yeah.
I still don't have any leads there. But now I'm supposed to take this book and turn it into a parish event. And that's not as easy as it sounds.
Sure.
But so it took us a couple weeks, and then we scheduled this event at our parish. And within a couple weeks, we had another parish event planned in Louisville, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
We had another one planned in Atlanta, Georgia. We had another one planned in South Bend, Indiana.
Wow.
We had another one planned on the north side of Dayton, Ohio. And so since then, we've done this parish event in, well, I've spoken about the Seven Sorrows in 7 states now.
Wow.
We've been in dozens of churches. Kalamazoo, I've shared the Seven Sorrows in Kansas City, Missouri. I've shared the Seven Sorrows in Chicago. It's just been crazy. And once we had the conference, the parish event planned, and like I've got this a workbook that people go through when they're at the event. Once we had that done, now it's just a turnkey out of the box. I can do it anywhere, anytime. Just give me 5 minutes notice. And so a couple months before we did that first workshop, but now things are all getting in line. I meet with a good friend of mine and I said, hey, listen, maybe God wants me to start a nonprofit and spread the seven sorrows.
Mm.
Would you be on the board of this nonprofit? And he says, Carl, you need to get a job. And I said, thank you, for that encouragement. But
Yeah.
I've applied all kinds of places. I have nothing, just nothing. So he emailed me later that day and said, look, here's a job posting at the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. It just came open today. And Carl, you could do this in your sleep. I know I've seen you do this type of work.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, if I apply for that job, they're going to tell me I'm overqualified and they're going to tell me they can't meet my salary requirements. And he said, so what? You don't have a job. So I applied for the job. They interviewed me. And right away they said, you're overqualified. And then they said, wait for it. They said, we can't meet your salary requirements. And I said, I haven't even told you what my salary requirements are. And anyway, they offered me a job. The start date was the Monday after our first parish event.
Wow.
So, so there we go. 24 months of no income except for Larry from Amazon bought a book. Marion from the Catholic bookstore bought several books. And we sold some at a parish event, and then we've been doing parish events now. I'm still running the Archbishop's Appeal in Cincinnati,
Yeah.
and so this Sunday, which is March 22nd, I'm going to be doing an event at St. Antoninus on the west side of Cincinnati at 3 p.m. Next Tuesday, March 24th at 6:30, I'm going to be doing a parish event at St. Gertrude, which is where I was for adoration. Then in a couple weeks, I'm going to be at Newark, Ohio, St. Francis de Sales, the parish I grew up at. That is April 19th. We just did a parish event at St. Charles in Kettering, Ohio. And yeah, I think we're going to be booking a lot more events
Yeah.
for the fall and into next spring as well.
That's awesome. That's super exciting. I love, so like this is the second time I heard you share the story because I think you shared lots of it at the Meds conference, but there's like bits and pieces of that I'm like it's a little bit more. It's just crazy how your response to the priest was like, or the priest's response to you was like, "Are you ready to suffer?" And in hindsight, you can see exactly what that ask was. In the moment, it was like probably just like I guess yes, whatever suffering takes on. I kind of shifting from the story of like the Seven Sorrows, and I want to give you a chance to plug that at the end if folks are interested in like buying the book or getting connected with you. I want them to be able to do that. But before we go to that route, like I did want to ask, like kind of on like more of the theme of the Hey Brother podcast, we're talking to husbands and fathers. Like, what was that whole experience like for you as a husband, as a father, like going through this and like
Yeah.
praying and following the Lord's lead? Like, I'm sure it had to have been wild.
Yeah, we are supposed to be the providers. We're supposed to be the protectors. But the protection comes first and foremost by being the provider. So, yeah, 2 years with no income was just really hard. I didn't want to I didn't want to socialize
Hmm.
with people because I was embarrassed. I didn't want to I didn't want to ask people for help, but I needed help.
Hmm.
Um, it, it was embarrassing for me as a father with my children. Um, you know, my two daughters are trying to go through college while dad has zero income. My my biggest gift to them was they get to fill out the financial aid form, the FAFSA, and put zero on there. I mean, either you got to be rich or you got to be completely poor in
Yeah.
order to navigate college. So that was the gift I gave two of my daughters, was they got to fill out the financial aid form saying there's no income. But I mean, every day, if it wasn't every day, it was 6 out of 7 days a week that I would wake up and, as soon I would open my eyes and then I would, remember I don't have any income. And it was just a miserable feeling.
Yeah.
This is probably a PG rated podcast. So, but sometimes I would wake up and I would say not PG rated
Yeah.
words about my life, Um, but, I've had lots of conversations with people about suffering since then. And obviously, you know, Mary, Our Lady of Sorrows, was inviting me to experience a level of suffering in order to share with other people about her seven sorrows. And, I suppose there's other crosses that would be worse to bear than that. Because in reality, I think about the poverty some people have had to go through. In reality, we 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 didn't lose our home.
Mm.
You know, we we didn't go into debt. Thank God. God just really provided for us in a completely bizarre, unpredictable way. And and I'm going to say that that's not always going to happen.
Mm.
But I think it happened that way because we were being faithful.
Yeah.
I was not, you know, drinking, doing drugs. I wasn't living values contrary to the gospel.
Yeah.
And in the end, my motivation was to help people anyway.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Um, but so here are the promises that Mary gives for people who honor her sorrows daily. And when I read this list, it's unmistakable that we experience these blessings. I will grant peace to their families. Our kids range in age from 15 to 27, 20, 28, and all six of our kids are still practicing their faith.
Oh well.
Um, we experienced peace. Thanks be to God, my wife and I are still married and happily married. Um, and they will be enlightened about the divine mysteries. That's the second promise. And Nick, I've had moments where I've had insight into the seven sorrows and shared it, and I just think, where did that come from?
Mm.
I wrote a set of reflections, and it's a second book I wrote called Treasures of Grace. And a friend of mine who's a third order Carmelite read it, and he said, "Did you read The Interior Castle by
Right.
St. Teresa of Avila?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Nope, I haven't read that." And he said, "Carl, this reflection that you have in the back of this book, it mirrors the Interior Castle perfectly.
Mm.
It's just that it's based on the seven sorrows." I mean, I've experienced this second promise, they will be enlightened about the divine mysteries, to a degree I just couldn't have imagined. The third promise, I will console them in their pains and accompany them in their work. I experienced that. I will give them as much as they ask for, as long as it does not oppose the will of my Son or the sanctification of their souls. So I guess the lesson here is that a 1953 Buick Roadmaster convertible is not part of God's will for my life, because I've asked for that and I
Yeah.
still don't have it. I will defend them in their spiritual battles with the infernal enemy, and I will protect them at every instant of their lives. I just, we had an unexplainable amount of protection during this time. I will visibly assist them at the moment of their death. They will see the face of their mother.
Mm.
I have not yet experienced that promise, but then the seventh promise is, I have obtained this grace from my Son, that those who promote this devotion will be taken directly from this earthly life to eternal happiness. And that's such an amazing promise that you can't help but think, how is that even possible? But in Matthew 25, Jesus talks about welcoming into his eternal kingdom those who practice the corporal works of mercy.
Mm.
But sharing the seven sorrows is a spiritual work of mercy.
Mm.
So surely the spiritual works of mercy count in what Jesus says in Matthew 25. And in 2026 in America, the spiritual works of mercy are what people need more than they need the
The
corporal works
corporal
of
works.
mercy.
Yeah.
So I'm just sharing that with you because, Nick, I know that there's some guys on this call who are going through a hard time, and they're going through a financial challenge, or someone in their family is experiencing a health issue. By the way, during this time, my son experienced chronic Lyme disease, which
Oh man.
renders him virtually disabled and requiring medical treatments throughout that time of unemployment. 2 or 3 medical treatments a day my son was going through.
Wow.
Other people on this listening to your podcast are going to be struggling with addictions or the consequences of addiction that impact their family. They're going to be dealing with temptations to unforgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be they're going to be experiencing a gamut of things. And the book I wrote is called Something You Can Count On. And obviously the seven sorrows rosary is something you can count on. But what I mean by that title, what I meant in choosing that title, is that these promises are something you can count on, because these promises are promises from Mary, the mother of God.
Mm.
These promises are from heaven. And, you know, I'm a recovering sales and marketing consultant. And so I can tell you, I understand about promises. And
Mm.
I've heard a lot of promises, and I've heard some empty promises attached to this product or service. I've heard empty promises from family and friends at times. And I've also experienced, and Nick, I bet you have too, and those who are listening right now, you've experienced diabolical promises,
Mm.
promises that deliver the opposite of what they promise. It promises that with this gamble, you might get it all back, but you end up losing more. Or this promise is that this bottle is going to bring you comfort and it leaves you wretched.
Yeah.
Or a promise of intimacy or pleasure that just leaves you empty
Mm.
and filled with regret and shame. We've all experienced diabolical promises, but these promises from Mary are promises that you can count on. And you know, if someone's listening to this podcast and you're in the car, I mean, I don't want to cannibalize your audience, but I want to say, don't forget to pray the rosary.
Yeah.
Am I saying you should not pray the 5 decade rosary? No, I'm not saying that. But after all, how long does it take to say the 5 decade rosary? It takes 2% of your day. How long does it take to say the seven sorrows rosary? It takes an additional 2% of your day. So in total, you can do both with the cost of 4% of your day. So I'm saying this, and I'm speaking directly to the guys who are listening to this podcast.
Mm.
And there may be a Chris out there, or Paul, or Tim. Pray the rosary. Pray the rosary every day. Mary is the most powerful creature in the universe.
Mm.
And I say that, and someone says, what about Jesus? Jesus isn't a creature. Mary is the most powerful creature in the universe. And And she is not nagging you. She is not saying to you, make your bed, take the trash out, stop and get me a dozen eggs. When Mary begs you to pray the rosary, what she's really doing is she's inviting you to beg her. Because the rosary is you asking her for things. She's not nagging you to do something. She's trying to tell you how much she wants to do for you. So don't neglect to pray the rosary every day.
I love that. I love that. There's so many guys out there who are listening to this podcast in our audience that I think, I mean, myself, like I'm convicted. We have a devotion to the Rosary, but just a double conviction of looking at the seven sorrows more intently, and like just letting ourselves be convicted of the help that is there. That Mom wants to give us help in this. So that's awesome, Carl. Thank you so much for having, or thanks you so much for being on the podcast. Um, Real quick, how can guys connect with the book and or get connected with you and your work?
Yeah, the book, something you can count on, is on Amazon.com.
Okay.
And you can find links to it. Sorrow2joy.com is my website. Sorrow, the number two, joy.com.
Okay.
But you can find it on Amazon, and there are also a couple of smaller breakouts of that, including a 30-page seven Christian responses to suffering, a book, a 30-page forgiving yourself, and these are just sort of like um, deeper reflections on the seven sorrows in a particular topic. There's one called Turning Sorrow into Joy, and there's one called Take Courage, which is for men who struggle with an addiction to pornography. I'll just share with you real quickly. The first event that we did at St. Susanna in Mason, Ohio, there was a guy who came to that event, and several weeks later, I got a call from him. Actually, I got a call from the Chillicothe Correctional Institute. And, this is the Chillicothe Correctional Institute. Will you accept this call? And on comes this guy who says, hey, Carl, I came to your first event and I had just been indicted for the creation and distribution of child pornography.
Wow.
And after your event, I started praying the Seven Stars Rosary, and then I was sentenced. But I want to tell you that praying the Seven Stars Rosary has healed me from an addiction to pornography. And that checks out because not only did Mary give these seven promises that I just shared with you, but in Kibeho, in Rwanda, Mary appeared in 19 in the 1980s, throughout the 1980s, and she asked that the Seven Stars Rosary be reintroduced to the world. And she added five additional promises. And
Wow.
one of them is, those who honor my sorrows daily will be freed from obsessions and addictions. So it's another promise from heaven that men can count on. And I encourage men. This book is called Take Courage, and it's because Joseph of Arimathea, at the standing over the dead body of Jesus, he took courage and he asked Pontius Pilate for the body of Christ. When Peter denied Jesus, Peter maybe was risking imprisonment, maybe he was risking a punch in the face. When Joseph of Arimathea stood over the dead body of Jesus and offered to take his body to burial, he was risking death.
Mm.
But he took courage. The Gospels tell us he took courage. And so, how did he take courage, Nick? He took courage because he saw Our Lady of Sorrows standing at the foot of the cross for 3 hours
Yeah.
while other men ran away afraid. Joseph of Arimathea took courage, and you men can take courage too. And in each of the sorrows, you'll see that Mary touched a man in a particular way and gave him consolation, gave him hope, gave him courage. And she can do the same thing for all of those who are listening to this podcast.
Amen. Absolutely. I think that's an awesome note to end on, and having men out there take courage to run to our mother for all the help that they need. I'll have all of the links and ways that guys can get connected with your work in the description below. Carl, thank you so much for being here. Men out there who are listening, if you guys are interested in what I do as a Catholic psych mentor, you guys can head to my website, crafterformore.com. There is information about how I help men become who it is that God's created them to be. So thank you guys for listening to this episode, and we'll catch you guys next week. God bless.
God bless you, Nick.
Thanks for listening to the Hey Brother podcast. If this episode has been a blessing for you, help us grow by sharing it with a brother who needs it. Visit crafterformore.com for more resources in growing in brotherhood, pursuing chastity, and overcoming addiction. Don't settle for less. Hit subscribe, and let's become the men God has created us to be.